The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Got Plans. I'm Brian Pettiville, Chairman of the IIAB-CAL Emerging Leaders Committee, and with me today I'm excited to have Cheryl Koch, President and CEO of Agency Manager Resource Group. Cheryl has served in nearly every capacity in an insurance agency, having been an account manager, producer, and agency owner. She now devotes her time to agency management consulting and training and speaking at industry functions throughout the country. Cheryl currently consults on marketing and sales, sales management, agency operations, automation, and strategic planning through her Roseville, California company. For today's webinar, we have muted all your phones to eliminate background noise. However, you can ask questions throughout the webinar and do that in writing through the right-hand navigation area of the Go To Meetings tab on the right-hand side. And I promise you all of your questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So now I invite you to grab a pen, sit back, and listen as Cheryl takes us through.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third and final installment of our webinar series that we're doing with respect to the challenges that are facing independent insurance agents. And today our topic is Got Plans. We've talked about two of the other challenges throughout the time we've been doing these. One, the recruiting of talent. The other, the organic growth issue that many agencies are facing. Today we're going to take a bigger picture look at strategic planning and that process, and what you think about if you sat in on the other two webinars, that those were a subset of what we're going to talk today. Those were detailed. Today we're going to fly up to about 40,000 feet and look at some issues facing agents from that standpoint. And what we've been using as our framework throughout this process has been the Independent Insurance Agents and Brokers of America Best Practices Study. That study began in 2010, and the most recent update, 2012, it's a 3-year program. Agencies that are involved in it participate in the program over 3 years. And what we've been trying to do is find these nuggets or these data diamonds to use as a point of reference for all of you as far as what you can do in your own organization. And interestingly, I think, somewhat telling, is that when they do the best practices study, they evaluate the participating agencies on a number of different criteria. And they do ask them at the beginning of the 3-year period of time for those agents to identify their biggest challenges. One of the questions they do not ask in the best practices study is whether or not the participating agencies have a formalized, written, strategic business plan. I'm not sure if that's an oversight or if that's something that they just didn't feel was relevant to the plan. But I can tell you that in our consulting work, the first step when we begin working with an individual independent agency is that we send out a questionnaire of our own to try and gather some basic data. One of the questions on there is, do you have a written strategic business plan for your agency? And after all of these years, we are still amazed that it is a very low number of agencies. And that does not seem to matter whether we're talking about very small agencies or extremely large agencies. This lack of a formalized business plan being in place just seems to be rather common. I would say easily 9 out of 10 times the answer when we ask that question is no, we do not. When we look at a best practices organization of any kind, whether it's an insurance agency or not, a couple of the hallmarks that we see are they have a dedication to creating and maintaining a sales culture in their organization. So we've talked about the organic growth issues, and we're going to continue to talk about that over the course of time. Certainly that is very prevalent. It's an issue faced by many organizations. When you drill down, though, and look at some of these leading organizations beyond that, you'll see that most of them do have very well-crafted, very well thought out strategic plans, and they have an obsession with focusing on obtaining the results that they set forth in their strategic plan. They don't take their eye off the ball. They don't vary and waver too significantly from that plan. The plan is what keeps them making the right decisions as they're moving forward. It's kind of the track for the agency to run on. And if they feel they're getting too far off track, they use the plan to help them refocus. So we like to say that if you look at a really extraordinary organization, you are probably going to find that they're somewhat zealots when it comes to the planning process. Oh, did my screen just go funny?
Yeah, sure. It looks like things got a little bit zoomed in there.
Well, let me see if I can zoom it back out. Well, there. Can you see it better?
There we go, better.
Did that help? Okay, so the age-old adage of planning is always, well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That's kind of a loose paraphrase of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland when she asks the Cheshire Cat which way she should go, and he says, well, of course it depends on where you want to be. And she says she doesn't really care. And that's really how planning is done in many organizations within the insurance industry. And when I talk about independent agencies, I would also say that we have found a remarkable lack of strategic planning also at the carrier level. Maybe not at the gigantic multinational carrier level, but particularly at the regional size carrier. We're finding the same kind of lack of planning that exists there. And one of the things we want to talk about then is, why is that? What is it that prevents agents and brokers and their carrier partners from creating these business plans? One of the things clearly is, just like Alice, not knowing where you're going. If you don't have a very clear vision of the future you wish to create, then it's almost impossible for you to sit down and actually begin the process of creating your business plan. And I'm going to remind you from time to time that when I'm talking about a strategic plan, it is always written. A lot of times if you ask agent or broker, agency owner, do you have a plan for your agency? They'll kind of point to their temple with their finger and go, oh, yeah, I got a plan. It's right up here. That doesn't count. That's a good start, but really what we're talking about is taking what's up in your head and memorializing it and putting it down in paper. So one of the prohibitive factors then for getting that done is that people will say they simply don't have time. They put it off. They know it's something that they ought to do, but it's on the to-do list and it never gets to done. So that's one of the things that we see is a starting point. It is very difficult for a lot of people to capture those thoughts and put them down in writing. It's a somewhat daunting and simply required. Many independent agencies are self-sustaining financially. Not all of them have to go to the bank and secure loans and do things like that that might trigger having to create a business plan. You can pretty well hang out your shingle and roll along and not encounter any particular point in time when somebody else, an outsider third party, is going to say to you, I need to see your business plan. What I think is all interesting is insurance companies will sometimes ask the agency, and I always say to the agent, if they ask you for yours before you show it to them, make sure you get a copy of theirs. And that's how we find out that many of the smaller regional carriers don't have a written plan themselves. And so obviously one of the issues is that people don't feel they have the tools or resources or expertise in pulling together strategic plans. And that's kind of when if you've ever written anything in your life, you kind of face that blank piece of paper and it's staring at you and you really don't even know where to begin. So we're going to give you a framework this morning that you could begin with, kind of the specific things you would want to include in your plan, and really encourage you to think about it in a modular sense, so that a written plan, if it's going to be 50 or 60 pages long when you finish with it, you really do have to break it down. It's like that old story about eating an elephant one bite at a time. So we're going to hopefully give you a framework in order to do that. Bottom line, why most people fail to plan, that's not just insurance agencies. I think that's true for every individual. The one thing you know is if you didn't put a plan in place, if you didn't write it down, and if you didn't share it with anybody, you have no fear of failure. When you start to write things down and you start to share them, it's like going on a diet. You tell somebody you're on one, and the next time they see you, there's an expectation there. And I think that fear of not accomplishing one's goals is what prevents most people from putting the plan in place in the first place. And that's a shame, but that's what we have discovered, is that it's easier for an agency to get to the end of their fiscal year, look back over the thought we'd be. It's where you planned to be. So I think that is an inhibiting factor to putting these plans in place. The benefits of strategic planning are many. Obviously, it does help an organization to set its priorities. And when I call it a track to run on, I think that's very important, because agencies get faced with a lot of opportunities throughout the course of their existence, and certainly in the course of any one year. And it's easy to get distracted. And your strategic plan helps you to keep your priorities in place. We all have finite resources, finite amounts of talent and money. We have to keep that moving in the right direction, making sure that but allowing ourselves to flex if necessary, but really using that to prioritize our use of our resources. It certainly helps everybody focus their energy. One of the biggest challenges we have, especially as an organization grows, is for everybody in the organization, all of the talent, to be aligned and marching in the same direction. Without a strategic plan, that's nearly impossible. A lot of organizations will say to their managers and their leadership, I just don't feel like I know where we're headed. And furthermore, I don't see how I fit into any particular plan. So one of the things that having this document does for an organization is certainly keep everybody's energy focused, keep everybody moving in the same direction. It strengthens the internal operation of an organization, because you'll see that one of the parts of a good, sound strategy is your internal operation. Plans top at the sales marketing level. That's all well and fine to have at least that piece. It's a start, but you must go to that next level, which says, how are we going to support, even if we achieve our sales and marketing goals, how are we going to support that? That has to be a next step in the plan. The establishment of our desired objectives is important and keep us all focused. It's going to be, are we going to know whether or not we have met or exceeded our goals if we didn't set any in the first place? And again, I would say that most agencies are pretty good about the sales, pretty good about working with the producers, coming up with a number. Obviously, that's very visible, and a lot of agencies are very keen to make sure that that's broadcast, that that's publicized. But if that's the only goal, that does not help the other members of the staff to see how they fit in. Very clear how the producers do. Very clear that you may have achieved that level of success, but you needed these other targets for everyone else to keep them all pointing in the same direction. And obviously, when we're talking about writing a plan down, it still does have to respond to an ever-changing environment. Obviously, we know that we exist in a very dynamic industry, and that at this particular point in time, for example, you're putting together your strategic plan, employee benefits is a part of your organization, and no matter what plan you put in place, you can be clearly impacted by external factors such as Obamacare and the things that are coming down the pike with health care, you're going to need to be able to flex that plan from time to time. Not throw it out and start again if it was a sound plan to begin with, but at least be open to making mid-course adjustments to the plan. So what are the basic fundamental components that you would have to have? And we could conceivably do a 2-hour webinar on every single one of these because they're pretty huge chunks of your plan. We already talked about the marketing and sales plan. That's where most people's strategic plan begins and ends. That is certainly one key component of your strategic business plan. But again, it has to be followed up with your operational and your service plan. What is it going to take? And that's pretty broad. That includes things like your internal operating procedures, your policies, your IT technology issues are all part of that operational plan that has to be in place. And if you're going to, hopefully, experience the levels of organic growth that we're encouraging everybody to do, then you're going to have that support mechanism in place as you grow. Most independent agencies hire behind the curve, meaning the sales takes place first, we start to feel the pinch, service begins to suffer, then we hire. The strategic plan, the operational component of it, should help you prepare for that a little bit better and hire ahead of the curve as the growth is coming on. The financial plan, needless to say, many agency owners come to the ownership position or to the management positions from the sales side of the business, not necessarily from the financial side of the business. So when we talk about digging for these data diamonds, particularly when it comes to financial planning, you can really use the best practices study to help create your financial plan. There are 4 or 5 key metrics that exist in there that you want to be focused on at any time. Obviously, profitability is a huge piece to this, the valuation of your agency, productivity numbers all go into part of your financial plan. They're all pieced together, however, because one is tied to another part of the plan. So when I talk about productivity, that has a huge tie to the operational plan, because we're not just talking about producer productivity, we're talking about staff productivity. So these aren't all completely isolated. These pieces all have to fit together. Perpetuation and succession planning. We are constantly saddened by the fact that many, many agency owners who are in a certain demographic, let's just say above the age of 50, do not have a firm succession or perpetuation plan in place. Now this is where you get some inadvertent planning or accidental planning. If you didn't craft anything else and you didn't implement it, you didn't put the things in place that needed to exist, then your plan really has become selling your agency. It's not necessarily the one you actively wanted to have, but it's the inevitable one that you're left with when you didn't create a more formalized structure for the succession of the agency. So that has to be a big piece, and that probably is a more prominent issue than it has been at any point in the past, because the demographics of the agency owners at this point happen to be in that 50-plus age category. Another component of it is joint agency company planning. In the challenge section across every revenue category, agency owners said that one of their continuing frustrations was their inability to meet the carrier volume commitments. And we kind of know how this game is played year after year. We're approaching the end of the year. The company rep comes in, tells us that we haven't met our goals for this year, we've missed them by X amount of money, and oh, by the way, for next year, we want more than we wanted this year, and you failed at that. So it's a very vicious cycle, and it really doesn't need to exist that way. There is a process. Best Practices has one of the best tools available for doing joint agency company planning. And that means seriously sitting down about this time of year and thinking about the business that the carrier wishes to extract from the agency, getting right down to the account level, not just a big number, and then the agency working its sales and marketing plan around that. Instead of just having producers going out trying to identify accounts and then trying to fit them into our volume commitments with the carriers. So there is a piece to that plan that can be very formalized, and obviously you're not going to do that with 12 or 20 insurance company partners, but certainly you're going to do that with your 3 to 5 key company partners in each of your departments. So I said I'd give you a little bit of a framework. What would this plan look like if you looked at it after it had been created? So kind of think about what your table of contents would be, and it would look something like this. So you could also use this as you're creating your plan. These would be these little bite-sized pieces that you would want to put into place, leading you to the entire strategic plan. That would be just an executive summary, a little introduction. So sort of look at your plan as though you were going to go to a bank and ask for a big loan. You wanted to buy a building, you wanted to hire producers, whatever it is you want to do in your future. I'm going to put my portfolio together. I'm going to make myself look as presentable as I can, being very, very realistic about what we can and cannot do. And this plan is going to be all of these pieces put together. So we're going to have a description of our business, and that's where you get to brag about yourself and say, we've been around for this long, we're a family organization, we're one of the 100 largest, we're this, that, and the other thing. Very brief, but you get to brag about yourself. And then you get to the more difficult pieces. A very detailed analysis of the business environment in which your agency exists. That means geographically, that means industry-wise, that means doing a lot of things to talk about these issues that are coming down the pike, such as healthcare reform, all of the things that could impact your business in a business environment, and then broader, the basic economic factors that are involved. If agencies had been better at strategic planning, the last 5 years wouldn't have been nearly as big a struggle, because obviously people saw the recession coming and didn't adjust fast enough. If you'd had a strategic plan in place, you may not have been able to predict exactly when things happened or exactly what the final outcome was, but you would have been better prepared to respond to it. So that's the part of your plan where you really do want to consider all of the factors that are going on around you in your business environment, regulation, all of those kinds of things. The SWOT analysis, something that a lot of people are very familiar with, and again, this is a piece to a strategic plan that a lot of agencies do. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Looking at both internal and external factors that affect the agency or that are likely to affect the agency. And obviously, kind of interestingly, we're really good at identifying our strengths and our opportunities and not so much on the weaknesses and the threats. So you do have to always do this being very realistic. This is a fun exercise with all of your staff. When we're talking about this, we'll talk in a minute about who would be involved in the strategic planning process. But when you look at this, for this one little piece here, it is very educational for managers and owners to see what their employees perceive to be the strengths and weaknesses of the organization. So you don't want to minimize those weaknesses. You don't want to discount the threats. You have to be realistic about what's going on and then know what your competitive advantages are going to be. Industry background, again, things that are going on within the insurance industry specifically, merger acquisition, changes in carriers, all of those kinds of things. That would also be a piece to your plan. A competitor analysis, and that's not just who are the 6 or 8 other independent agencies that you compete with in town. That's that. It's also mindful of the fact that for those of you who write personal lines, You are constantly in a battle with direct writers, and we've talked about that for many, many years in the independent agency system of the encroachment of direct writers on our business and our inability in some cases to regain market share once we've lost it. So a comprehensive competitive analysis is going to take into account online providers, it's going to take into account direct writers, every other method that exists out there, and keeping in mind that in some cases our insurance carrier partners also play a role as a competitor. So to the extent that they have embraced these alternative distribution channels, they also would factor into the competitive analysis. Individual plans, those components that we talked about, the marketing and sales plan, the operational plan, the financial management plan, the perpetuation plan, those are going to be the core of this document. The rest of it isn't fluff, but it's a lot easier to create. When you get to those individual plans, that's where the heavy lifting comes in creating the plan. And then obviously a good strategic plan should be forward-looking. We should be forecasting what we think is going to come down the pipe. So when you're creating this plan, you're really focused on the next year. It's really a 12-month plan, but you also have to take into account a 3-year vision, a 5-year vision, and in some cases maybe even a 10-year vision. Obviously, the further you go out into the future trying to create the plan, the less accurate your prediction is going to be, but it gives you a framework. So this really is something that if you put your mind to it and you dedicate the resources to getting this done, you really only do it once. And then everything from that point forward is just an update or a revision. So in terms of who should be involved in the planning process, I would say cast as wide a net as you can. I think it makes for a much more robust process and creates a better plan. Needless to say, you're going to have your owners and your agency managers who are going to be involved in the process. Then you have to think about which of your employees. You probably have, like every other business, key employees, maybe 3 or 5 individuals who really are a significant contribution to the overall agency's results. This isn't something that you want to keep a big secret. It's not necessarily something, though, that you want everybody to be involved in. If you have people in your organization, that's going to get too cumbersome, and that's when you're going to get stalled and the plan's not going to get created. Some agencies are forward-thinking enough to include some of their key clients in their planning process. When you think about customer service, part of a strategic plan is not only recognizing what your customers want and need today, it's anticipating what they're going to need in the future so that you can build those value-added services into your plan. So inviting customers in at an appropriate point in time. Not just survey them, that's also very, very helpful. You can do it in that way, but actually having some of your customers participate in your planning process. And you might be thinking, well, why in the world would they want to do that? You know, they've got their own business to run. Yes, they do, but you're an important partner to them. You're an integral part of their running a better business or organization. Why wouldn't they want to help you? Strategic partners, your centers of influence, anybody that can also help you. Somebody that you know that is an example of a business that has done a good job strategically planning, and then they can help you and they can lend some of their expertise, because if that's something that you're lacking or that's a reason why you've put off doing this, they can be very helpful. And I think most of us have found that people do want to help other people, so it's not like you're asking something and they're just going to totally ignore you or they're totally going to shut you down. Most people will want to help you. Consultants, well, that's what I do, so of course I'm going to throw that in there. As you go through this, sometimes the longer an agency's been in business, the more internalized they've become. They see their world around them. They see the world within a 50 or 100-mile radius of their office. They don't necessarily get the opportunity to participate in forums or other kinds of venues where they interact with agents from all over the country. Most consultants work with agents all over. Very few of us have the luxury of having the operation in that 50 or 100 mile radius. So we do get the opportunity to see, we do get to gather anecdotal information, and clearly the best practices study is a national type of study. It involves agents from all over the country, so you can blend that in, and that's helpful. But I think sometimes outside expertise, facilitator, if you will, through the planning process, somebody to keep everybody on track. If you've been involved in strategic planning meetings where you didn't have a third party in the room of any kind, whether that's a customer, a company partner, a consultant, it's easy to get off track. You set down, you set aside the time to do this, but the plan never comes into being simply because you got sidetracked with too many other issues. So sometimes it's helpful to have those outsiders involved and very clear agenda when you're going to go through this. Some other issues to think about: when would you create it, or when would you really be heavily involved in the planning process? Assuming you operate on a calendar year, obviously most of our carriers do. Right now is when the planning is going on. Right now is the budget cycle for most people. This is a perfect time of year. Kind of back to school time is a good time. That's, you know, you've had the relaxation of the summer, hopefully, and now it's really to get mentally prepared for 2014. It's going to be upon us very quickly. And we know that many agents have the calendar quarters are their big renewal business days, so October 1st being a very big event in many agencies. You would want to push this back to late August, early September, kind of take a breather during your 10-1 renewals and make sure those are all in November, and when you're going to really put the finishings on the plan. Where should you have these sessions if they're very formalized? And we like to see that planning process be formalized. Really good idea to have them off-site, whether that's one day or two. And when I say off-site, I've been with agencies that one of the owners or one of the key employees had a mountain, and we would go up there for a couple of days, kind of sequester everybody to do it. It really needs to be very, very focused. Almost impossible to do if you try to do it in your office where you have all of the distractions. If you're serious at this, you can commit a day or 2 days of these key personnel and these key outsiders to participate in the process. What does it look like? Well, it looks like a book, or it looks like a big 3-ring binder, if you will. It is modular in nature, which is good. That's how you approach it. That's how you want to keep it. That way, when something significant happens that only impacts one component of your plan, you have the ability to go in, make your updates, make your changes, and keep the plan fresh all the time. Who should you share it with? Everybody. There shouldn't be anything secret in your plan. If there is, if you go to all this trouble and you get it all put together and you think, gosh, I hope blank doesn't see this, and blank could be my carrier partners or my employees, then I think you want to take another look at this and say, why is that? Why am I not proudly sharing my business plan with anybody who cares to see it? I think your employees, that's a must. It's very difficult for them to feel part of the process on a day-to-day basis if they've been kept out of the planning process. And we did that, we said, because it gets too cumbersome if you have too many, but you got to share it with them. That's how they'll feel invested in it, and after all, it's our people who are going to get us where we need to go anyway. So like everything else that we discussed in our webinar series, all of this really does come down to a leadership issue. And we've talked about how independent agencies, no different than other organizations, typically are overmanaged but underled. So all of these things are leadership issues. They are items that all the others in our organizations are looking to us to create. It does start from the top, and nothing could be more important. It's more illustrative of that than creating your strategic business plan. It's your vision. It's a hopefully shared vision with a lot of other individuals, but it's your agency, and it really does have to be based on what your goals and aspirations are for yourself personally, for your family, and for your organization. And all the other pieces just sort of fall into place. So we hope you will join us at InsureFest and sign up for our session that we're going to be doing there. And one of the things we are going to be doing at Agency Management Resource Group is rolling out a new program for 2014, and it's called the Certificate in Independent Agency Management. This won't shock you, but it's going to have several components to it, one of which is going to be strategic planning. One component to it is going to be marketing and sales management, operational management. It's going to have several components to it that we hope put together will improve everybody's ability to manage their independent agencies in the future and really thrive and get to where we've talked about wanting to go for a long time but have struggled to actually get there. So we're very excited to launch a new program, and any of you who attend InsureFest and go to our best practices seminar there will actually be completing one of the first steps in obtaining the certification in independent agency management. So we're happy to announce that, and we will be talking more with all of you about that in the future. Whether or not you attend InsureFest, we really feel that if you need insurance knowledge, if you needed to learn something technical in our business, you could go out this afternoon and you could probably identify 100 or more places you could go to gain technical knowledge about any specific insurance product. But there are very few places that you can go where you can really focus on running a better agency. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brian and see if there are any questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl. I definitely think this is something worth talking about further at InsureFest, this new certification you just announced, and how great is it they get to knock out one of the first steps just by attending. So thank you for that. That's going to be big. I'm personally going to look forward to attending that myself. I want to remind everyone that you can go ahead and type those questions in the GoToWebinar section on the right-hand side of your screen there. And we'll go ahead and we have time for just a couple questions. But one thing that comes to mind is I'm sitting here and I'm scribbling notes and I'm looking back at the last two webinars I've got done with you. You know, where would an attendee start before going to InsureFest? And what's a good place for them to maybe do some homework, maybe do some research within their own agency, depending on what they do there, and what would make their time at InsureFest most effective? What should they know beforehand?
Good question. I think one of the most important things, because we have framed this entire series around best practices, it would be to go to iiaba.net and purchase and download the best practices study. When you do that, you have to start with 2010. That's the actual study. And then 11 and 12 are updates. So remember I said that's 3 years. All the agencies participate for 3 years. The newest group has been formed right now, but the study won't be released for a little while. So that is still the most recent one. And what I would do is I would take that, I would identify my category, and I would start to do a very basic analysis of where I compare, based on my numbers, those best practices agencies. And that would be a good starting point. You have to have a benchmark of some kind, and there are all kinds of things that are out there. I know that there are several independent agencies that participate in other types of groups with similar sized agencies, and they do benchmarking. There's nothing wrong with using those as well, but since we're using the best practices study, and this has been around now for so long, that I think that the Big I National has done a very good job of collecting the information that is helpful to agents. So that's where I would start.
So if an agency wanted to start today, that would be a good template for them to use to start off for their development of the agency plan at their level then.
Absolutely. And so start with the study, and then if you go on the website, Big Eyes Web, a lot of sub-pieces to the study. So if you think about this strategic plan, for example, there is a piece of best practices where they study the best sales organizations. There's a piece of best practices where they did talk about succession planning and perpetuation. So there are a lot of other little pieces you can begin to build from, but I would start with the study in general. Learn as much as you can about what these other organizations are doing and how do you compare. At InsureFest, our 2 hours is really going to be spent talking about that very first fundamental step, which is what we call a gap analysis. I have to start with where do I want to end up. I have to look realistically at where I am now, and I build my plan around that gap. How do I move myself from where I am to where I wish to be?
Very, very good. Well, we're just about coming up to the end of our time here, and I want to remind everyone, if you have questions still or something comes to you later on, you see Cheryl's contact information right there on the screen. You can contact her or contact her through the IIAB Cal. We're more than happy to get you the information. Most importantly, I want to remind you to go ahead and go to insurefest.org to get yourself registered for the event that's coming up next month. Cheryl is going to be one of the presenters out there. I know her sessions will be very well attended. So with that, I really want to say thank you again, Cheryl, for spending some time with us today. This insight's valuable, and I think it's something we can all take a look at our own agencies today and see where we fit in and what we can do. And like I said, if you want to hear more from Cheryl, we have recorded this webinar as well as her previous ones, and those are located on the website at www.insurefest.org, and you can go ahead and download those and listen to those. If you have any questions or want to follow up on some things you've already heard, go ahead and click on that InsureFest Agency Management Track Webinar Series link. And in addition, like I said, go ahead and visit that same website to learn more about the InsureFest that's going to be held October 24th through the 26th at the Las Palmas Resort and Spa in Rancho Mirage. And all the registration and hotel information can be found on that website, www.insurefest.org. Once again, Cheryl, thanks so much for your time, and this will conclude our webinar for today. Have a great day.